It is still surreal. It's still a bit strange. I was just telling Michael before, about 2 days after the election, I was doing breakfast on the ABC and sitting in where they're rebuilding their studios. I was sitting quietly in a little corner there, a little corner studio, and with them doing the show from Sydney, and down the in my earpiece came this reverential voice saying, "You'll be on in 90 seconds, Senator Hinch." And I sort of looked over my shoulder. It was quite weird. Now, first, I should say very importantly here today that you all know, being members of the Press Club, about Chatham House rules. Well, they don't apply. Okay, so it's all on the record. Anything I ever do is on the record. What I say here today is on the record. Michael, and I won't speak for very long at all, because I'd rather take your questions, and you know virtually where I stand on most issues anyway, and I don't want to do what I saw Senator Cass do yesterday when we had the formal swearing of the elected senators down at 2 Lonsdale Street, and after Jeff Pope announced we're all legal and he was going off to see the governor at 4 o'clock, he invited the ones of us who were there to get up and say a few words. And most of them got up and said, "Thank you, we're humbled and we're honoured," and da-da-da. And Senator Cass got up and spoke for about 15 minutes. Sounded like a bloody political speech. It was so boring. But there we are. So I'd rather just answer your questions. A couple of things. You did mention, Michael, the passion that I've had for many years about a national public register of convicted sex offenders. That was the driving force for this campaign. I should say, though, that this time last year, I had no intention of getting into politics. None at all. It was never an ambition. I never thought I would. I spent more than 55 years on the other side, on the outside, looking in, arguing with pollies. And 4 months ago, they even rejected, we didn't have our official party logo. And we started off very small. In the end, only about 5 or 6 of us actually ran the whole campaign. But over the period, we covered 11,250 kilometres in the Justice Bus. And the driving force was this campaign for a register, for an Australian version of Megan's Law. And it happened, I suppose, the gem of it, or the germ of it, was last time I got out of jail, as one says, the last time I got out of jail, we decided that we'd do a jail to justice walk. And so from Langi Kalkal Prison to Government House, we walked for 180 kilometres over 10 days, and then presented 11 volumes of signatures from around Australia calling for the states to get together for a national register. And I talked to Attorneys General in Victoria and New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, and I thought we're getting somewhere. In fact, John Elferink was the AG in the Northern Territory, and he phoned me in my home one day, and he had me almost in tears, because he said, "Darren," he said, "I want you to know I've got Bruce and Denise Morecambe here on speakerphone. The law has been passed in the Northern Territory. You've won." And then they shelved it. And so I thought, what do we do next? And this sort of what developed, and like topsy it grew, and now I'm a senator. And that issue, and people say, well, what can you achieve? What will happen? Well, then Michael just handed me a note. He interviewed Rachel Griffiths just recently, and he just handed me this note, if I can get my glasses out. And I've only seen this 10 seconds ago, and this is why I hope I still have fire in my belly, and I still have passion for these issues, and why you have a right to know about convicted sex offenders. And she won't mind this. She's a great lady, Rachel. But she has said, "Dear Darren, firstly, congrats. I'm proud of you being alive and making a difference. I want to reach out to you regarding a child trafficking and human rights issue. I've talked to Julie Bishop, who's setting me up with Brandis to discuss it, but you would be our key advocate. We want to take passports permanently away from convicted sex offenders. Child sex tourism is on the rise as local opportunities, schools, etc. are shrinking. We're constantly dealing with victims of Australian offenders. If we can take a passport off a bankrupt, why can't we stop our pedophiles travelling to Myanmar? I'd love to discuss this with you. Can we get this done, Rachel?" Now, we can get that done. Now, that's something I can get involved in. I can do something there. You probably don't know. 100,000 convicted sex offenders on the register, the private register, the Masonic Lodge secret register, 100,000 of them go to Indonesia every year. Now, they're not going there for the son. They're going there for the sons and the daughters. Now, what she's come up with there is a fantastic thing that I can get involved in. And they're the sorts of things that I want to do. You could not get elected, though, as a one-issue candidate. Voluntary euthanasia, dying with dignity, is another issue I feel very strongly about. I am hoping that I can get 1 million new donors signed up for organ donors. There's a government app which hasn't got off the ground, which you'll be able to punch a little number in and register as a donor. The problem there, of course, is on the current system, you don't know this, but hundreds of thousands of organs are not donated because you're on the register, but your family overrules you in their grief, and it won't happen. And it doesn't happen, and organs could save thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives are thrown in the medical trash cans. Now, I want to have a system where you have a living will. It's called Opt-in Plus. They've tried it in 5 states in America. You have a living will, you sign that register, and as an adult, that will cannot be overturned by your family. And I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think we can add another million people there. One of our other platforms was animal cruelty. I'm not very popular in some parts of New South Wales because I support Premier Mike Baird. I think I applaud his ban on greyhound racing. They've had decades to clean it up. It is corrupt. It can never be. It's endemic. It can never be fixed. Slitting little kittens' throats and live baiting rabbits is not the way. It's not a sport. And in the United States, I've just got back this week. Only 8 states, I think, still permit greyhound racing. So I hope we get a national ban on greyhound racing. And I see people the other night on Paul Murray Live saying, "Oh, it's part of the social structure and it's part of the community and things." Well, so is bloody cockfighting. If you want to do that, go and that argument does not hold water with me. I want to take your questions rather than talk at you. As I said before, I'll just tell you 2 quick things. One is that I will be, no matter how long I last in the Senate, and they can't, as of today, despite what Bill Shorten said about having an early election, constitutionally they can't remove us and have an election for the Senate, for any Senate seats, even a half Senate, for 2 years. So that is the law. I'm also hoping rather than 3 years, I'll get 6, because under section S282, according to the AEC, I came in elected at Senator number 6, so I should get the 6 years. The way that the Greens and the Libs did it last time, though, with minor parties, I don't hold my breath on that. And it is not a constitutional thing. That's a Senate deal, whether you get the 3 years, whether you get the 6 years. But I said I am already in the record book because I have discovered that I'm now the oldest senator ever elected in Australia. So there we are. Who said there wasn't life after 3AW? And when that came out that I'm the oldest, somebody went on Twitter and said, there should be an age limit on the Senate. And I wrote back and said, I agree 100%. 100%. What minimum do you suggest? So I am there. I am passionate about these issues. I've mentioned some others. I support Rosie Batty on domestic violence issues. Rosie Batty walked with me. Denise and Bruce Morecambe walked with me. George Hell-Vegas walked with me. When we went from where Jill Maher was slain, we walked to the final steps of our Jail to Justice walk. They all came with me, and Rosie Batty has brought so much attention to an issue. And we're still miles, a long way to go, but as you're all journalists, and I'm the oldest probably one of the journalists here, but I recall the days of how we have come some distance on this domestic violence issue, because as a young police reporter on the Sydney Sun, we drove around the Rounds car. We had police radios in our cars. They were illegal, but the coppers knew we had them because if theirs broke down, they come and used ours. And you'd be sitting out there at 3 o'clock in the morning and you'd hear a voice crackle over the police radio and it would say, serious assault at such and such a street, Mossman. And we'd all start heading there, almost getting there before the coppers did sometimes. You'd almost to Mossman, I'd hear their voice again say, nah, forget it, just a domestic. And we'd all go home. The coppers would turn around, we'd go home. It was just Mr. Kelly beating the shit out of his missus again. And so we have come a long way since then. Still a long way to go, but we're getting there. Now look, I prefer to take questions. Anything you like, any topic you like, let's go.
As the man says, there are roving microphones around the room. I'll kick off though while we move the microphone over there. Are you looking forward to Senate School next week?
Yeah, Senate School. Well, I spent all yesterday with people from the government departments, and I'm learning. They live in acronyms. Everything's an acronym. And because it's Canberra and because of the public service, they have pay grades like ABC. Now, only because it's public service, you'd think A got paid more than C, wouldn't you? No. C gets paid more than A. It's CBA, the way they work it. But Senate School's coming up week after next, 2.5 days of that. I'm told, I don't know when my maiden speech will be. I spent 5 hours on the plane halfway on the home from Hawaii the other day starting to write it. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a good one. But you're not meant to speak, I think, in debate until you've done your maiden speech, so I want to get that up as fast as I can. But I think 23rd of August or 25th is Senate School. Do you have to wear a tie in the Senate? You wear jeans? I don't think you can.
No, I think you don't have to wear a tie.
But women would have to. Why don't women wear ties then? Why can women wear jeans in the Senate? We're going to test that one out. That'll be fun. All right.
Hi Darren, my name's Katie. I'm from the Federation of Community Legal Centres, and I just wanted to touch on your last point about domestic violence. Community legal centres, about 40% of their work every year is with victims of family violence, and we get a mix of state and national funding. We're getting 30% of our federal funding cut next year on the 1st of July, and I was just wondering if we could ask you to champion the cause for keeping funding to Senator George Brandis.
Yes, you're right. But one thing I do want to do, and touching on the same area, is I don't agree with Pauline Hanson. I don't agree with a lot of what Pauline Hanson says. I don't agree with her crazy idea about sacking the family court and getting rid of it and having some community. It's unconstitutional anyway. She's full of shit. Don't talk about it. Anyway, I do, though, want to have a Senate inquiry into the family court and all child welfare agencies. And I'd love to see a national child welfare agency, an Australian child welfare agency, which combine, because at the moment we've got a system and even a database of all injuries, children's injuries. Because at the moment you've got a father can break his kid's arm in Sydney, and this has happened, and it's on no record. When then he moves to Adelaide, and the kid dies. Now we're a federation of states, I know, but there's some things that should be national and should be able to cross-pollinate. And because of the child welfare agencies, one of my candidates in Queensland, Deb Cotter, she has fostered 43 children over the years, 43 kids. And she told me she will not take a child over the age of 3 because by then they are too far gone and unsalvageable. Now that's a dreadful indictment on this country. I mean, countries are judged, in my view, on 3 things: how you treat your elderly, how you treat your children, and how you treat your animals. And in 2016, Australia fails in all 3 categories. We do. And so those 3 categories which I'll try and do my damnedest. Look, I know I'm not going to stand up here and promise the world, because I've seen people where it hasn't worked. Peter Garrett, full of ideals, fire in his belly, tried to live in Canberra by Midnight Oil's lyrics. He ended up a broken, disillusioned, discredited man, blamed for the Pink Bats fiasco, a tragedy with 4 young people dying, and he took the blame. He wore it because of what Rudd pushed through on that. You remember Neville Wran as the Premier. I mean, Wran, in one of those Chardonnay confessional moments, said that by the time you get to the top, you're so covered in blood and muck from all the deals you had to do to get there, you forget the reason you got into politics in the first place. Now, that is also a terrible indictment. So I'm hoping, I sound naive, but having argued with politicians for 55 years, I think I know when never crap a crapper used to be our slogan at the Hinch program, Dermot, as you remember. The other one was no guts, no glory. So you tie those 2 together, it's a good start. But I'm hoping I won't be politically correct. I hope I'll be the least political politician you can find. And I know I'm only one man in there, and I'll just give it my best shot. But if I fail, well, I'll admit I failed.
And just a reminder, we're on live TV, Darren.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
They've heard it before. Hello, Adele. What's your next Walkley you're working on?
I want to ask about victims of financial advice and life insurance fraud. Do you have any thoughts on a Royal Commission into the financial services sector and how we can fix up the culture and the mess that's going on?
Now, without trying to duck you or take your name in vain, or the age in vain, or some of the other stories that have been so incredibly well done about financial exposures and common insure, et cetera, in the newspapers. There's a great deal of persuasive argument in favour of a Royal Commission. I haven't said I'll support one yet. I've said about all of these other issues that aren't my 7. I've said I'll get to Canberra, I'll get advice from all sides. I'll look at it all and I'll make a decision. I won't be making an announcement where I support something, whether it be ABCC or whether it be other issues. I'll wait till I get there. I'm lucky that since I was elected, even the next day, I had a phone call from Malcolm Turnbull. I had calls from Brandis, from Morrison, from Penny Wong, from Shorten, and they've all offered that I can have access to independent Treasury advice, information, independent material from the Attorney General's Department, and at the moment, I'm like most journalists. I'm either developing your own sources, or I'm relying on what I'm reading in the Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Herald Sun, and watch on the news at night. So I want to get there, see the whites of their eyes, apart from anything else, and judge every issue. I mean, I've always been eclectic about politics and my stand. I think I'm more of a socialist on medicine than I am on any other issue. So I won't say yes and I won't say no, but I know exactly where you're coming from. The one issue that wasn't on my 7 when I ran for election, but I've already said with Fran Kelly this morning on RN, and this is very appropriate. This is the best forum to talk about this. What the hell is going on with the attacks on Bill Leak? We're meant to be journalists. We should be supporting him. I mean, you might have found that cartoon offensive. Of course it was offensive. But what do we say? Je suis Charlie, but ban Bill Leak? I mean, it's mad. And I cannot understand this, It's okay to depict Muhammad as a pig or a dog, but you can't say what you think about some situation with Aboriginal kids. I thought his cartoon hit home as cartoons are meant to do. Take a satirical aspect that has truth behind it. That's what a satirist is meant to do. Now, I've spent some time in the past couple of weeks with Nigel Scullion, who's attacked and disapproves of that Bill Leak cartoon, and that's his opinion. He's entitled to it. But I've agreed to him that I'll go out back with him and go to some of the communities. And he told me, he said, just today as we're speaking, Darren, he said there'll be a 12-year-old kid giving birth to from an Aboriginal settlement. So if all the people are so offended by Bill Leak's cartoon, I wish you could get out there and say, I'm also offended by an 8 and 9-year-old Aboriginal kid who's been raped by a family member and elders have covered it up. That's what you should be getting upset about. I remember on 3AW a few years ago, thank you, a few years ago on 3AW, I went on there, opened my 4 o'clock program and said, good afternoon, a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old, two young girls, 9 and 10, were taken from their beds and raped in Toorak last night. And then I paused and I said, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Not in Toorak, but it happened somewhere outside Alice Springs or somewhere like that, or Mount Isa. I said, now I've got your attention. And that was it. So on the issue of this, what I'm leading up to is this with Bill Leak, is I'm going to be campaigning hard to repeal, at least amend 18C. I think every journalist in the world should do the same thing. Because, look, it should not be a crime to offend or insult somebody. I am offended and insulted by a law that can put you in jail because you offended somebody. We have defamation laws, use them. But surely, I know the danger here, the awful thing here, standing up here doing this, is I'm supporting some of the views of a Pauline Hanson. But she's entitled to her view. I find it repugnant. I've only ever met the woman once. It was at Bob Rogers' 75th birthday party, and somebody said, what do you think? And I said, well, she seemed to be a very pleasant woman, and some very unpleasant things come out of her mouth. And that's the way I feel about it. But she's entitled to her view. Even George Brandis, who with Tony Abbott, they pushed for 18C to repeal, and then they went to water. They just fell apart on it. And Brandis, apparently, according to Fran Kelly, says it's not on the agenda to bring it back. Well, it will be on the agenda. So I had half an hour with Corey Bernardi last night. He wants to push it. And back in February, on my birthday, February 9, I was asked by a bloke, would I go and have coffee with him? And I did, and his name was Bob Day. And he said, I want to have coffee with Darren, so will you co-promote a bill with me? I said, a bit early, mate. It's only February. He hasn't even called an election yet. I don't think I'm going to get in. And in fact, I got in more easily than Bob Day did, as it turned out. But he wants to repeal it. So I know there's going to be other areas, and I know that some of One Nation want to do it, and I know why they want to do it, but for different reasons. But it is freedom of speech. You can't say bugger Voltaire if you really believe it. You can't go march in the streets and say Je suis Charlie, and then say, well, we can't have that, and you can't say that. It's offensive. Of course, it's offensive. But even Brandis I know he said it clumsily, he probably said it wrongly, but he was right when he said bigots are entitled to an opinion. I mean, if you're going to have freedom of speech, you've got to have it. And people in the media should be championing the argument as hard as they can.
Yes, down back there.
Good afternoon, Darren. Lauren Hilbert from 3AW. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
My question comes in two parts. Firstly, several of the issues you've campaigned on, bail reform, sentencing reform, parole reform, are actually the domain of the state. Would you like to see the federal government play a bigger role in that sphere? And secondly, do you plan on running candidates at the 2018 state election?
I'll answer the second one first. Watch this space. And that's not just Victoria. And there's a lot of state elections coming up before that. On the other issue, you're quite right, many of those things are state issues, and people have said to me, oh, when Hinch gets into Coward's Castle, will he name names? As a court of last resort, yes, I will. I know they're state issues, but I can also use them to identify magistrates and judges who sometimes go under the radar. I think our legal system, it's the only one we've got. I mean, let's improve it. I don't agree with Koori courts. I don't agree with Sharia law. But I think the system we've got, it needs to be improved, and there are national ways we can do it. Now, I personally would, I know there are state issues, I personally would get rid of state governments completely. I don't think we need them. I think we should have a federal system, a federal government, centralised government, and then increase the power of local councils who collect your garbage and report on potholes in your roads. I don't think we need all that. And if that was Grace, of course, it's not a popular view. But I think on the national issues, we can do them. I mean, the Attorneys General, they all go to Canberra for meetings. They get to, there are national issues. The Megan's Law has to be a national issue. There are other areas, like domestic violence, more and more we have to. But when I say about naming names, there was a case just this week in New South Wales where a judge said to a man, I'm only going to give you a few months' jail because you've spent so much of your time in jail, I fear you may become institutionalised. This man should have been bloody institutionalised. One of his crimes in the past, which he spent time in jail, was the rape of a 10-year-old girl. Now, I don't care if instead of the 7 months you gave him, he may get out in 3, if you give him another 10 years. And this whole idea, my view of this is that so much time and energy is expended on the perpetrators, on the criminals, and not on the victims. The victims often get attacked physically and sexually once, then they get betrayed and attacked and violated again by the courts, and then they talk about the rehabilitation. I'll argue this about rehabilitation of pedophiles, and I was asked by a New Zealand 60 Minutes crew, they said, don't you believe in the rehabilitation of pedophiles, that a pedophile can be rehabilitated? And I said, no. She said, really? I said, well, let me ask you a question. Rachel Smalley it was. I said, Rachel, let me ask you a question. You've got a 7-year-old daughter. Would you let a rehabilitated pedophile babysit your child? And she just looked at me. So I said, I rest my case.
Yes.
Thanks, Michael. Darren, Jim Tennyson, journalist. I suppose I should say congratulations, and another journalist in Parliament can't hurt. I'm just interested with your 7 issues that you've raised, looking realistically, how you see yourself as the lone Darren Hinch Senate party, if you like, being able to actually get the changes that you want made through the Parliament. Are you not going to have to do some deals and look for alliances, the same as the political systems worked for 400 years? I'm just wondering, and if you could let me know, what would be the main thing you would like to get through in your term in Parliament?
It's a very good point, and it's been coming at me every which way since I've started to have meetings with people. I am passionate about getting this National Register of Convicted Sex Offenders, but I've already told people if I had to postpone that for a year, because the only way I could get it through would be a deal with a government or a party, an issue that I didn't like. I'm not going to wheel and deal and say, oh, yeah, I can go along with that because this other thing's so important to me. You can't sell your soul. Now, I'm hoping that I don't have to do that ever. I know that I can work with some aspects of the other cross benches. I've already had talks to Jackie Lambie, a couple of things that, a very colourful lady. A couple of things that we can work with, and that's Veterans Affairs. I think she's done some great work on that. She's also indicated support for the register. I know, without getting into details, that the federal opposition seems to be more encouraged and open to the idea of this register than I might have thought. So there's areas I think I can move. I think that most of them I think will support me on the trying to get 1 million more organ donors. I mean, some of the issues that I raise surely just common sense. Dying with dignity. You know, voluntary euthanasia, if you have a poll on it, 75-80% of people would approve of it. And I just came back from Hawaii this week with a very dear friend. She's 83, she had a double mastectomy, she's got cancer, and she said, let's go for a drive. We drove down in Kauai to Lahui, and she said, I've never been driven to Walmart by a senator before. And she told me quite matter-of-factly that when her quality of life goes, she's going to get on a plane and go to California, which has just made it legal, and she will say thanks for the loan of the hall, and she will end her life. And it was very hard for a dear friend to be telling me this, but I agreed with it, and I can understand your motive. And I go back with this to way back. I've supported Philip Nitschke for probably 20, 30 years. And I recall when my own mother died 20 years ago, I sat at her bedside all night. I thought of looking at her. She had no quality of life. There was no dying with dignity. She was incontinent. She was a very dignified lady who's lying there with a pillow between her legs, and she had no life. And I contemplated putting a pillow over her face, which I happened to mention on radio a few days later. And of course, one of the glossies said Hinch was going to kill his mother, you know. But at the time, I thought if she had been, she looked like a Biafran. She wouldn't have weighed 30, 40 pounds. And I said, if she had been a dog, and the RSPCA had walked into that room at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would have been arrested for cruelty to animals. I would have been. Now, this is madness. It's something that had Kevin Bloody Andrews fingerprints all over it, supported by John Howard. They knocked off, Nitschke in the Northern Territory, they had 4 people did legally and with dignity take their own lives until it was wiped, and then they made it hard so that even the ACT and nobody else, no other state could bring it back in. But I will be pushing hard on that. Look, I hope, getting back to your question, I don't want to do deals. If that means that I can't get all that I want, I'd rather do that and say, well, I tried, than be seen as somebody who's just another poll. You know, imagine saying, Hinch finished his career as just another Polly, not the way I want to go out.
Yes, and please raise your hands if you have questions. We have a question over here. Yes.
Hi, Darren. My name is Ajita. I'm one of the Indian magazine, Indian Malayali. But my basic background is I'm a trained mental health professional. As your area of interest is sexual predators, that's what you were being jailed for. So one thing I wanted to tell, because as a part of my other job, I always see these sexual predators coming to the mental health hospitals, and always they'll get the privilege of this current Mental Health Act, and they will say themselves that they're psychotic, and because of this current Mental Health Act says we have to treat them in a least restrictive environment. So we have to let them go because we can't restrain them in the hospital or to get treated because they don't have any background to do that. So I used to see these people like my ex-clients in Flinders Street, Preston, wherever I'm going. It's really sickening to see that, but we can't do anything about it. So the thing is, we need to do something. It's my appeal to you, from the law point of view, if you do something about it, to keep them or to get treated or do whatever, rather than them floating around in the community, because I know them, so I know them. Half of the people, or 95%, may not be knowing who their neighbor is. It's really sickening, see them floating around the schools. I have seen people ex-clients, even in the school areas floating around, and I'm thinking, this is one of the one who had that history, which is scary.
And you can't say anything.
I can't do anything. With the current Mental Health Act, is because of the least restrictive environment, it's really difficult. It's changed a lot now. So it's really frightening for all the mental health professionals, and so especially the psychiatrists, their hands are tied. They can't do anything.
Look, I know where you're coming from, because there was a case recently. A man's name, his name's not suppressed, so it's all right, guys. His name was Kevin Briscoe, and I got onto the story that he'd had a career of 50 years of molesting children, spent most of his life in Ararat, and found out that he was out again, living one block from a primary school. And Simon Bristol, you ran the story on 7 when I went out with the phone camera and got the story. Walked up to him and he said he admitted who he was, talked about the whole thing, and said he wasn't likely to offend again unless he got on the drink. That was his comment to me. And I said to the local police, have you alerted the principal of the school that this man is here? They said we can't because that would intrude on his civil rights and his rights to privacy. And so I took his picture and I took it to the school and I gave it to the principal and said, I think you and the family should know this guy's wandering around your school. The story ran on Channel 7 that night. The next day, he was moved to another location, and just to add to it, the DPP then went to court and got another suppression order forbidding me from naming him or giving his address if we found him again. Now that's the way it goes. The current register, why I'm so passionate about it, the current register is rubbish. A senior policeman, a very senior police officer in Victoria, said to me the register, the private register, is mere public relations to try and make the public feel better. It doesn't work, it can't work. Most of the sex offenders who are on the register self-report because the police can't do it. When we did the Jail to Justice walk, a senior policeman from Ballarat walked with me. He said, we have 120 men's names on the register here. He said, if I visited 3 of them a day, once a month, we couldn't get to them all. He said, I'm meant to do other work as well. There'd probably be at least 7,000 men and some women on the sex offenders register in Victoria, probably 9,000 in New South Wales, but they won't tell you the exact figure. I got those from policemen. And what you don't understand is that rank and file police officers aren't allowed access to it. He can't just go into the police station and say, oh, this guy's acting suspiciously, can I look at the register, have his pictures, see if that's him. You have to be the rank of inspector to get access to it. The other thing I didn't know until a sex offender named, also not suppressed, named Simon Cooper, ex-magistrate in Victoria, his name was not put on the sex offenders register. He molested 2 of his friends' young sons, and I've talked to those victims in the past. His name wasn't put on the register because, I didn't know this, it's at the discretion of the magistrate or the judge whether you go on there or not. So look, I know what you're saying, I feel for you, but as it sits now, I mean, surely it's a right to know. The Irwin family, their 2 daughters might still be alive today if the rapist who has moved to live next door to a bottle shop, next door to their apartment, if they'd known who the guy was that he lived there. And he murdered and raped both those girls and then disappeared. He was shot dead by police on the way to Perth. Maybe little Daniel Morecambe might have been alive. Or at least his parents might have had not 13 years of suffering, wondering if he was alive or not. If the man who killed him had either got a decent sentence after he abducted a 5-year-old from a caravan park in Darwin and raped him and left him for dead in a burnt-out car. If he had got a real sentence, his name had been on there. And look, people say to me, oh, what about the vigilante issue here? What about this? They've had this Megan's Law. They've had it for 20 years in the United States. Bill Clinton signed it in 1996. Now, that was named after Megan Kanker, and I've interviewed her mother, Maureen, in Hamilton, New Jersey. 3 convicted sex offenders lived across the road from them in this little country town with a white picket fence and all that stuff. And they didn't know. The local police didn't know they were living there. And the guy who killed Megan admitted later on he watched her, he stalked her on the porch for a couple of months before he grabbed her, said, come and look at a puppy, and raped and murdered her and stuffed her body in a suitcase and threw it on the local tip. Now, her mother decided to push for this law and became a state law in New Jersey before it became federal law. And I'll never forget one thing that she told me. And I suppose every parent, this nightmare, would think, gee, I hope if that did happen, that it happened quickly, that she didn't suffer, that she didn't know what was going on, that maybe she was knocked unconscious. Well, in the case of little Megan Kanker, the way the coppers got her attacker was that he confessed after they found a 7-year-old scratch marks on his arm from where she'd fought for her life. And that's when her mother started to cry, because that's the sort of stuff you're up against. Now, it may not save a lot of lives, but it seems to have worked. I've stood in with Sarah Monahan, the Hey Dad victim from Robert Hughes. I stood with her in her hometown, where she now lives in San Antonio, Texas. And she pulled out her phone. She pulls the phone out, and she said, look at this. And she punches up on it. And if you'd punched the word motel, maybe 17 little flags would have come up there, and you say, well, that's where the motels are. She punches up sexual offender, and up came maybe 19 flags showing where they lived within 2 miles of where we were standing. And it had his name, his photo, his home address, his crimes, how long he spent in jail. And we drove past the house. And there were people were throwing Molotov cocktails through the windows or burning it down. It was a normal sort of house with a flag on the porch and a pickup truck in the driveway. But the locals knew, if they wanted to check it out, that a sex offender lived there. So your kids didn't go trick-or-treating there on Halloween, and if the ball went over the fence, you didn't chase the damn thing. And to me, it's just, our slogan for the whole of the Justice Party thing was, it's just common sense. And to me, that is just common sense. And that, I know I keep coming back to that, but that was the reason why I got into politics, and I hope it's the reason why we can achieve something.
Question in the back there. Yep.
Hi, Darren. My name's Dee Cherry. Firstly, congratulations on getting elected to the Senate.
Thank you.
I think that all your issues are very important to most people, but two that are close to my heart are animal welfare and marriage equality. So I have two questions. What do you plan to do in regards to the live export of animals and also the management of the animal pound system and the euthanasia, unnecessary euthanasia of, I guess, cats and dogs, and how the councils are managing those? And secondly, what do you plan to do in regards to marriage equality, because it's about time?
Okay, on the first one first, during the campaign I figured I must be getting close to being elected because suddenly the Labor Party started to attack me, and on Twitter somebody referred to me as a Johnny-come-lately on the ban live exports issue. They said quite pompously, oh, some of us have been pushing this since 2012. Well, two things. One, yes, they were pushing 2012, and one of the great things the Gillard government did was to ban live exports after that Four Corners expose. But I went on air next day on 3AW and I said to the magnificent Lynn White and her team at Animals Australia, I said, don't pop the champagne corks yet because it won't last. And it lasted about 6 weeks. And now with Barnaby Joyce and Barnyard Barnaby there, it's going to be even tougher to get rid of it, even when you have people sledgehammering cows to death in Vietnam. As a Johnny-come-lately to this issue, in 1981, I took a petition of 30,000 names to Canberra to the then Primary Industry Minister, Peter Nixon, demanding an end of live exports. That involved then live horses to Japan and live sheep to the Middle East. And the reason what triggered all that was not a television report. It was a story that 10 or 11,000 sheep died in abominable circumstances on a sheep-carrying ship off Fremantle, and it took about 4 days for them to die, and they were just abandoned. And so that caused a lot of passion, and we pushed for it. It's going to be an uphill battle because it's an industry. We could end it. I was in Townsville campaigning for our candidates up there, and they were just announcing, both sides, Bill Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull, one of them was in town the same day, announcing $100 million for the new Townsville sports stadium. I'd rather they spent the $100 million on revamping and revitalising the Townsville abattoir and get involved with frozen meat, and to hell with the live export market. Look, I got attacked by people up there. It is their livelihood. You'd have to phase it out, but it should be done. It's unconscionable the way that animals are treated. I said before, how you treat your animals is very important. I've also pushed for as I said, for a ban on greyhound racing nationally, but it'll have to be done state by state, and you hope the dominoes start to fall after what's happened in New South Wales. On the issue of equality was one of our 7 issues, and that includes not only equal pay, it includes equal rights for marriage and marital equality. I think that Malcolm Turnbull, the real Malcolm, if the real Malcolm had, when he recalled Parliament on April the 18th, if he had stood up then and had the guts to say, listen, I'm the Prime Minister, I've recalled Parliament because we are going to have a vote on same-sex marriage. We're going to do it now in the Parliament the way it should be done. Everybody's saying, oh, but we've got to have a plebiscite. Must have a plebiscite because the people have a right to have their say. Well, where was everybody? Where was the Liberals and where was Labor and the need for a plebiscite back when John Howard tightened the Marriage Act and inserted the words man and woman? You weren't consulted then. The Parliament did it the way the Parliament should have done it. I mean, it is a sick joke. I never think, I was born in New Zealand, like in conservative New Zealand, where sometimes they're so well balanced, they have chips on both their shoulders. I cannot believe that New Zealand has marriage equality, that Ireland has marriage equality before us. I would have bet money on. Look, the Turnbull thing fascinates me, and I can have these personal opinions. I was flying back from Townsville, and a flight attendant said to me, we started to talk politics, and she said, Darren, I'm a Labor voter. I always have been. But I would have voted for the real Malcolm Turnbull. And I think that's where he ran a bit astray, because I think, purely opinion, that he made this Faustian pact with the right wing of his party, and he's hampered. And so the real Malcolm, there's no fire in the belly anymore with Malcolm Turnbull. It wasn't during the campaign. The Ronald Reagan orator wasn't there. You know, the Prime Minister from Central Casting wasn't there, and it intrigues me. So there must be a reason why he stumbled. And I think, look, people ask me where I stand on the plebiscite, and there's all sorts of moves to maybe block the plebiscite or whatever. It is crazy we're going to spend $250 or $350 or $450 million on a plebiscite. If the Parliament could get there and get a vote up some manner of form, no matter what coalition went together, I'd go along with it. If the plebiscite has to be the last resort, I mean, it'd be terrible if the plebiscite is scrapped. And where are we then? We do nothing for another 5 years. The convoluted way that they said this, and we'll do that, and the next term then, and this term here. So I'm hoping somebody's going to come up with one of the major parties, or some aspects of it, will come up with some sort of solution. So I think that covered all of it, both of it? Right.
We've got time for a few more questions. We'll go at the back of the room there. There's one over here. Then I think one of the students at Kilvington wants to ask a question as well.
Beware of students' questions. The toughest question at Donald Trump's speech yesterday, press conference yesterday, came from a 10-year-old. So.
Darren, Kevin Aubrey, journalist. Yeah. Congratulations. My question's out of left field a bit. I wanted to know your opinion on capital punishment, and I'm talking about people we have in Australia where there is no doubt, like Port Arthur, like Hoddle Street, like Gilmar. Do you have any opinion on whether we should be spending millions of dollars keeping these guys, studying and, breathing in and out?
Do I have an opinion? Is the Pope a Catholic? The reason why capital punishment was not on our party agenda, and is still not on our party agenda or any of our policies, is because it is not an issue. It will never come back in Australia. Successive governments, Labor and Liberal, have made sure that cannot happen. I think that is wrong. I think we talk about public opinion polls, 75 to 80% of people would agree that capital punishment should be brought back in for certain crimes. I agree with you about Martin Bryant. I agree with you about Hoddle Street. Now, I know all the arguments against capital punishment, against the death penalty, because I espoused them for 25 years. I was totally opposed to it. And then I read the autopsy report on Anita Cobby, and I read some of it on radio, and I started to have doubts about my views. And I shut up about capital punishment, didn't advocate or against it for a couple of years. And then I now support capital punishment in some circumstances. Because of DNA these days, it would have to be not reasonable doubt, it would have to be absolutely no doubt. It would have to be, you say, a Port Arthur or a Hoddle Street. I know the Port Arthur conspiracy people will come after me again now about Martin Bryant was innocent, and I'll just turn off the emails. Those people, in my view, have lost their right to breathe the same air. And some of those cases. But you would have to have, in my view, you'd have to have a commutation or commitment procedure whereby a panel of, say, 4 or 5 Supreme Court judges would rule on all the evidence, and if there was no doubt, and the DNA was no doubt, then they could either do a thumbs up or thumbs down. So on that issue, in some circumstances, the rape and murder of children, the killing of a police officer, the killing of a prison guard, in cases of terrorism acts of terror, I think that should apply there. Should apply.
Yes,
Darren, congratulations on starting with a splash already. 2 questions that cover 2 of the 3 areas that you say define our society. Our institutional child protection systems, systems that abused children can end up bouncing between carers and parents for many years before their life settles, if it settles, and with untold things that can happen in between. Have we got it wrong? Is it too hard to get it right? Or what are your thoughts on that?
We've got it wrong. Get back to the other question. We've got it wrong. That's why I said this family court issue should involve the child welfare agencies, because I was talking about that, our candidate, Deb Cotto, and the foster children. There are kids being put into foster care who should not be put there. There are kids being taken out of foster care who should not be taken out of foster care, should be left with the foster parents. There are cases of where kids are being sent back to a biological father when they shouldn't be. And sometimes, on rare occasions, biological mothers. And I have to be careful here, this word of gender neutral, because whenever we talk about domestic violence and these sorts of cases and family court, the argument is there that, like, because the child came from the mother's womb, she should have more entitlements than the father to have custody of that child, which isn't always the case. So I think that we have got it wrong because it's not working, and the risks we've seen in some shocking cases, and specifically in South Australia in recent times, there have been institutionalised sex rings of adults passing kids backwards and forwards, and even taking them interstate. So we've got it totally wrong. And people find, I'm getting off it a little bit, but it is an umbrella issue, the family courts, that mothers sometimes can't protect their children because they can't afford the money, the lawyers for the family courts, because it gets so out of control. Suddenly you find you spend $40,000, $50,000 you don't have. And so it is... And it's become, I know I use the glib thing about Masonic Lodge, but it's become a sort of secretive thing. You can't, usual rules of evidence don't apply, usual rules of law don't apply. Sometimes, we've had cases where, I had one in the mail just yesterday, of a woman, domestic violence case, a woman in the family court, she, because of lack of resources, she had been raped by her husband, and yet he is allowed to interrogate her in person in the court. And not always by video. Now, something's rotten when that's a situation when you are a victim and yet you are being interrogated because he said, I can't afford a lawyer, and so the judge doesn't ask the questions. That would be in the presence of the man in the same room. But the judge isn't asking the questions. The attacker is answering the questions. Now, that's just naughty land, illegal naughty land. All right, you had a second question?
Yes, just quickly, you mentioned greyhounds and a national ban. Can you elaborate a little on why, but also what about the other codes, harness and thoroughbreds? What are your thoughts on those?
On which ones?
Harness, racing and thoroughbreds. What are your thoughts on?
I've campaigned against hurdles, against jumps racing for 20, 30 years. The difference between greyhounds and horse racing is that the horse racing, the racing industry is well regulated. And if a trainer or a jockey or an owner breaches the law on whether it be cruelty or other things or doping or whatever, they are penalised and they can be banned for life, and they are banned for life, and they're warned off the tracks. With greyhounds, as you've seen from all the greyhound reports, it's become endemic. I mean, they were given years to clean up the act, and yet many times it was the actual officials of the various greyhound racing authorities who were complicit. And to me, the greyhound situation reminds me of years ago, when a few of you might remember it, there was an oyster scandal in Australia. It was out of Georges River, at the time it was one of the biggest oyster-producing areas of Australia. And the Georges River oysters were found to be contaminated and were causing serious health risks. And so a ban was put, this is about 1980, a ban was put on oysters being taken or sold from Georges River. And they caught a man who was taking his oysters out of Georges River, replanting them somewhere else, and then selling them. The moral of the story is that man happened to be the president of the New South Wales Oyster Growers Association. And to me, the same thing applies to greyhounds. It is that corrupt, it cannot be fixed, it has to be shut down.
Hello? Oh, hi, sorry. My name's Alicia, I'm from 9 Years. Just a really quick question. Will you vote for the ABCC bill, the same one that was used for the government for the double dissolution?
What a great question. It's the first time I've been asked it in the last 3 weeks too. The 1,300th time I've been asked it in the last 3 weeks, and I'll give you the same answer I've given everybody else. I don't know what I'm going to do, because all I know is what I've read. I've never read the whole bill, and I think before I vote on it, I should read the whole bill. I spent an hour with Jed Kearney yesterday afternoon from the ACTU while I listened to her view on it. I know I've been mocked on Q&A the night when I said Hinch's first political promise is Darren Hinch will listen. So on this one, I'm listening. I will be going to Canberra. I'll be listening to Bill Shorten. I've already had one meeting with Bill Shorten, and I said I met with Jed Kearney yesterday. I will look at it, and I'll decide what I do then. I mean, at this moment in time, we still don't know whether there'll be a joint sitting of the Parliament, because I would think the Prime Minister will not call a joint sitting if he thinks he's going to lose it. And the weirdest thing about the ABCC was it was not mentioned in the Prime Minister's launch, at his speech on the launch, not mentioned, barely mentioned. If he did, I must have blinked and missed it, in the whole campaign. This was the reason for the double dissolution. And yet it didn't feature at all. And I was surprised that the Libs, and I think that when they do their review, they'll say, why do we shackle the Prime Minister? Why didn't we attack more the unions? Why didn't we go after union corruption, which is reportedly endemic? All those things weren't done. I think the Libs ran the most neutered campaign I've seen in years. I mean, and the other thing was, how could a Prime Minister, and I've met every one of them since Menzies, and I've interviewed most of them. I thought, here's a guy, if he had called an election last November, he would have romped it in. Bill Shorten would have been mincemeat, and yet he wasn't. And I've never seen a Prime Minister, whether it be Gillard or Rudd or Fraser, lose their political cachet so fast as he did. In 5 months, suddenly the Emperor had no clothes. And so on your question, I don't know. Okay?
Just about out of time. Time for 2 more questions. One at the back of the room, then we'll finish with the students, which you're fearing.
Mr. Hinch, a question on your thoughts at the pedophilia and the rape of young children and this 100,000 people that go overseas. My name is Vince Molliker, father of 4 people.
What's the question?
My question is your feelings on these people that go overseas for the act of pedophilia, we assume. I have 4 children, 10 grandchildren. With the thought of castration, whether it be surgical or chemically, has ever come into your mind?
You talk about chemical castration. No, it doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Chemical castration, stuff like Depo-Provera, no, it doesn't work. Does not work. And I'll tell you why it doesn't work. Because the most dangerous, to put it delicately as I can, the most dangerous weapon in a sex offender's life is not between his legs, it's between his ears. And Depo-Provera doesn't work. Okay?
So you feel that by castration would make just worse?
No, castration wouldn't work either. Same thing. It would not work. It's between the ears, it's the brain. Doesn't matter what you do. You know?
Thank you.
You chop one leg off a one-legged runner and he'd still try and run, all right?
The students, and I think Mr. O'Brien wants to ask a question.
Hi, I'm Max from Kilvington Grammar. My question is about the economy and how we're spending more than we're raising and what cuts should be made.
Good question. Let me tell you something. Paul Murray and I always disagree on this one. Joe Blow actually doesn't give a stuff about the deficit. If it doesn't affect you, if you're really honest with this, if it doesn't affect you, you really don't care whether the deficit is $40 billion or $100 billion or $500 billion. And yes, cuts are going to have to be made, but as soon as a cut is going to be made, somebody says, oh, that affects our special interest group, or that affects us, that affects me. I mean, during this campaign, you had Bill Shorten admitting how long theirs was going to blow out for. It didn't make a blip on the campaign at all. I know that somebody says, oh, that's great. That's a great plus for the coalition because Shorten's admitted that their decision, their attempts to rein in the deficit will take longer than the Liberals. Nobody out there gave a damn. Joe Blow, we live very selfish lives. If it doesn't affect us personally, we can't tangibly see it, it won't happen. I know it's not the answer you wanted, but that's a fact of life, okay?
And last question here.
Senator Hinch.
Who would have thought this? Dermot O'Brien, ex-producer of the Hinch program.
Dermot O'Brien, ex-producer of the Hinch program. Do you have a view on Daniel Andrews' treatment of the CFA?
Yes, I do. Months ago, I did a tweet in which I said something like, Daniel Andrews is the sort of person that firefighters fear. An out-of-control arsonist with an out-of-control bushfire. I believe what the Andrews government has done and is doing to 60,000 volunteer firefighters is an absolute disgrace. I think it's an absolute disgrace. And it's, you're seeing political corpses falling by the wayside. As part of this campaign, I spent a lot of time out and around sausage sizzles, usually manned by CFA groups down in Rye, down in Geelong, out in other areas. And I used to own a farm, and I lived and survived through Ash Wednesday, and my house stood and all the houses around me burned. And what people tend to forget as you try to unionise and union bust the CFA is that they're not just firefighters. If you're a country person in Victoria or anywhere in Australia, New South Wales, if you wrap your car around a tree, the first people there are usually CFA people. They're emergency workers, they're volunteers. And you've got 60,000 volunteers, and they take pride in it all. They love their work. They get up there. My farm manager was a local captain up at Mount Macedon, and he'd be up there working like a dog on the farm, but he'd get up at 5 o'clock on a Saturday morning to go down to the CFA to do their training. So no, I think the Andrews government is totally wrong on this one. I'm surprised it didn't bite them more. I thought that you saw Malcolm Turnbull took his jacket off and rolled his sleeves up there and got it and said, "I'm with you, workers," for one day. He appeared at one of their functions, then never seen again. But in brief, Mr. O'Brien, and it's been nice working with you. The answer is no, I do not like what the Premier Andrews has done.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Senator Darren Hinch.